we've gone through the first two items, and now we're on item 3. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Lowe.
And I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you. So, tonight we have prepared for you all an overview of our ESSER grant, which is also known as ESSER 3. It's the final ESSER grant, and as it's a federal grant, we're required to present to you all and let you know how things are going and what's in there. This grant has been through several different amendment phases, and so what we're presenting tonight is data representing the most recent amendment. It's been through 3 or 4 years now, started FY21, and so we are in the final year this year. So let's see, the period of performance, when we have to spend the money by, ends September of next year. So we're really thinking this is going to be a grant that has work done all throughout the summer, as you see, wraps up right in the beginning of next year. So when we started, and Caitlin's going to back me up because she was here when we started, we had developed 3 spending priorities. The first one was mental health, social emotional learning, positive behavior supports. And coming off of COVID, these were our priorities that we set forth as a district. The second one was access and success in academic learning. And the third one was healthy schools, focusing on our indoor air quality. Here's how those 3 concepts split up budget-wise. Those 3 investment categories. So we have air quality, mental health and social and emotional learning, academic access and success, conceptual balance spending. And that was done on purpose to make sure that we were representing all 3 of those priorities as we identified as a district. The next slides are going to kind of go inside the pieces of pie. I was inspired by it being fall and pie season, and so we're going in the pie. Blue pie. Mental health, social emotional learning, positive behavior. What's in here? We have our school-based social worker, prevention specialist, behavioral interventionists. We have retention bonuses that were paid for recruitment and retention of staff throughout the COVID pandemic. We have our Dean of Climate and Culture position. We have mindfulness training for our educators. Hazing, harassment, and bullying coordinator positions in this investment. Responsive classroom training. And our Aspire program teacher. So those are all of the investments that contained in this category. In our orange piece of the pie, access and success in academic learning, we have pre-K and early childhood transitions coordinator. Our investments in literacy and math for K-12. We have a general educator, current general educator position at Mary Hogan, but we've also funded a MUMS position and another year at Mary Hogan. It's a total of 3.0 FTEs. Special educator at MUMS was funded here. Summer and after school programming, multilingual community liaison, PD money for paras, and then PD money for ELL support. Anything there? Eat pie. The third piece was pretty straightforward. This is our Healthy Schools investment. The majority of these funds went to the engineering and eventual construction of an HVAC replacement in the A wing at Mary Hogan. We also funded engineering of a HVAC project at the high school, which is basically spending money to figure out what it's going to cost to eventually do that HVAC work down the road at the high school. So that was what's in the pie by investment type. This is a different pie. These are expenses by expense type. And so forget the first pie. This is how all of our expenses could be categorized with regards to what type of expense it is. So you can see the biggest piece of the pie here is investment in people, right? Salary and benefits, recruitment and retention bonuses, a little bit of materials and supplies, contracted services, so paying for somebody else who doesn't work for us to do something. PD money here, and programs. That was the summer program, which was initially a bigger investment, but we weren't able to hire a coordinator for that. And then finally, capital improvements. That's that air handling investment there. Next, we're going to go inside each one of those pieces. So first and foremost, the salary and benefits piece. In FY23, ARPESR funded 4.0 FTEs. This year, we're funding 12.75 there. That increased because a lot of those positions were funded on ESSER 2. As ESSER 2 sunset, we transitioned those people onto ESSER 3 for the final year of that grant. That's the cliff that we talk about in budget conversations about there not being another year of grant funding behind that. The total for this year is 1.67 million. If we go a step deeper into those positions, that 1.67 million breaks down roughly this way. So we have our behavioral interventionist funding, math interventionist funding, literacy interventionist funding, ELL support, and then our regular ed positions. So administrator, instructor, pre-K coordinator, curriculum director. So that's how our positions are set up this year. Back to the big pie here. Where do we go next? Retention bonuses. These have come and gone. There are no more expenses for retention bonuses, but that's ultimately what we spent on our existing and new employees during this grant performance period towards our retention and recruitment efforts. In our yellow piece, we have capital improvements. That's the project that we talked about. That's $880,000 right now. Roughly 80 of that is earmarked to the high school engineering. Another 80 went to the Mary Hogan engineering, and then 720 would be for the construction phase of the Mary Hogan air handling upgrade. We're looking for additional funds because initially this investment was supposed to cover the entire school. The price tag to do the entire school came back at $2 million, so we said, all right, we're going to do half the school. And we're still a little bit short of that, so we're trying to figure out where we're going to get there. But the goal is to use this money this summer. We're currently working on an RFP and pre-qualification for contractors who would be the ones to do that work. Little piece was contracted services. What are those? Paying people who don't work for us to do things. And we've got responsive classroom, virtual literacy, literacy audit as some examples of what we spent there. Our summer program was a larger investment. Like I said, I believe it was initially 100 or 150,000. It got cut down over time based off of not being able to hire somebody to really run the program as a coordinator. Those dollars were reallocated elsewhere. But we did run a small summer program this summer and funded it using ESSER. Just to review, we're back here again. So we did bonuses, we did salary, we did contracted services, we did capital improvements and programs so far. Materials and supplies, what does that mean? These are the the non-personnel items that accompany our math and literacy investments. And we also bought some software. And that was the last piece. That covers everything this year as we phase out ESSER. I think, one of the things that we talked about is finding local funding for the existing salary and benefits positions. So that's a priority. We have a plan for capital improvements funds to be spent down. And then, we're pretty well mitigated and our risk exposure to the other investments and not holding too much there. That's not going to have a source of funding next year. Any question?
Mary Heather.
I have a couple of questions. Now, on the slideshow that we have in board pack, there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the total salary and benefits number.
The 1.3.
Yeah, it's listed here, 1.27.
Yeah, I think that we reworked some of those, or went through some of those numbers a second time and found that some of the totals hadn't been upgraded largely based off of elected benefits.
Okay, gotcha. So the real number is 1.67, which is reflected on this.
Yeah.
And can you just tell me, or do you know, what is included in the meeting materials? Is it the same one that's in the board pack? Do we know?
It's the same one.
Okay, so we just need to make sure
Yeah.
that our meeting materials are updated to reflect the
Updated.
correct number. And then you mentioned a reallocation of money from the summer program and that. I'm just curious, can you remind us? I'm pretty sure it was mentioned, probably at a different update. But, like, I remember hearing before that we were not able to hire that position. And
Yeah.
so, there was discussion about should we use that for something else, and I just don't remember where it went. Can you refresh our memory?
Right. It's hard to say. It's not exactly linear. I mean, we have certain investments that come in over where they're budgeted at, and so that creates a need for excess funding. And then when excess funding does happen at a particular investment like that one, it might get grabbed by a couple of different things.
Okay, so it was kind of extra money.
Yeah, it wasn't a take it from point A and move it right to point B.
Right.
Easy peasy. Which could be tricky sometimes.
Joanna.
I have a question about the contracted services. I imagine that all of the contracts expire when the funding expires, right? Is there anything that the district is committed to going past next academic year, like subscriptions or anything?
I think we do have a software subscription, Power School PD.
Yeah. But if minimum.
We've had some software, I mean, it's, $7,000 here or there, we're folding in the local budgets where appropriate.
But
So
not,
it's small dollars.
not like responsive classroom that you've committed to.
No, that was one of those big contract investments. That's one time.
And then just, I don't know if other board members would find this helpful, but the current vacant positions, to be able to clearly see where we haven't filled positions. I mean, along the lines of what Mary Heather was asking, like for this, the vacant positions for FRCASR, but also just district-wide, like holistically looking at the entire workforce would be really helpful in my brain.
You put that together for me.
Or in this case, obviously, what's shown here is what is filled and spent under salary and benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing, no vacancies.
No vacancies.
Yes, Lindsay.
So, I just want to make sure I understand. So, there's like the budgeted amount, the actual amount, and then maybe the forecasted amount. Like, so when we look at this pie, is this the budget or the actual or some blend of the two? And then do we have something that we're forecasting out? Like if instead of looking at it as a pie, it was just in a spreadsheet or something of like, does that exist, or I'm not sure which line I'm looking at or which column I'm looking at.
Yeah, so some of the things are actuals, like, bonuses, for instance, that's money that we've already spent, there won't be any more spending. We know that that's our settling spot on that investment. Same goes with programs. We know that capital improvements is one that is budgeted. We know that part of that budget, especially the engineering phases at Mary Hogan High School, are already spent, so those are actual. We have yet to spend that remaining $720,000 from that part, so that's still budgeted, with an estimate backing it up. And we know that we're gonna have to find additional funds elsewhere in the district to allow that money to be spent. So that's sort of in that, intermediate phase. Things like materials and supplies are sort of in an intermediate phase because we're still in a period of performance where there are budgeted dollars that have been allocated to interventionist and coordinator teams who are still buying stuff. And so we haven't totally settled those up yet. Same with PD, still some performance to look forward to on that until that goes to actual. I think contracted services is probably pretty well settled. It's a mix.
And you're always working on budget, but when might we see, there's this cliff. I kind of want to look over the edge of the cliff and see what's in the ravine, to see going forward. There's some things that we won't be spending money on, but there will be positions that aren't there anymore. Is it pretty straightforward that, or are people beginning to advocate that this position is critical, we need to find money for this? That's a whole nother project in the future, but I'm just curious, when might we see that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the budget conversation, and this is really what's going on in ESSER right now conversation, but certainly we're peeking over the ledge.
Carrie, Heather.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Lindsay's point. It's the most important point, I think, for this board to consider is looking at this pie and realizing how much of that pie is a recurring cost that we do not have additional money for because we're on the ESSER cliff. So this board has to consider what will be done with the salary and benefits and be needing to ask this administration, what if this is critical and why, kind of that back and forth conversation, what aligns with our priorities as a board. So I think that is the essence of our big work ahead of us.
I'm also doing some math in the back of my head on that 1.6, and I think that probably includes the 4.0 FTEs that were funded last year, because it's not just health insurance that cut us from 1.3 to 1.6. So I'll send clarification on that, but I do think that this graph shows the entire usage of salary dollars and not just the current. Which would be closer to that 1.27.
Okay.
So I'll make sure that you got some.
Nonetheless, 1.27 in recurring costs, possibly pretty important positions with respect to our priorities on literacy and closing the gaps. And if this is what we want to keep spending on, where is that going to come from? So I think this is something that we all need to look at and digest and be thinking about. This is an important thing for us to tackle as a board, I think.
Suzanne.
So going along with Lindsay's speech a couple of years ago to keep us out of double taxation jeopardy, we took $500,000 and put it into the budget so that if we had continued going down that path, which was removed the next year, we would have had to start a budget already $500,000 in the red. So just remember that as we go forward, is that we've already loaned ourselves money. When we find out if there's a balance that does end up creating a falseness in your budgeting that
it creates
this
a
money, but it's really giving you just pushing the cliff down the road again.
Steve, and I understand these are important discussions, but we have been looking at this in the finance committee, and more is coming around the budget portion of this. it's not that this has been ignored, Matt has not ignored this.
No.
You will
None of us
definitely see,
are implying that.
you will definitely see that, but it's not quite ready for the camera yet.
Yeah.
And so, please, I would encourage you to be patient, and see what happens when we do get that updated budget report.
So one thing, as far as our role as a board, we, at least the way I interpret it, the training I've gone, we need to be providing guidance for how we're gonna make the decisions. Is that something that the finance committee is actually looking at as well? What that criteria would be? How do we determine whether a position goes forward? That kind of thing, or is that something the whole board needs to tackle?
So there's an even bigger issue than that we have been discussing, and, well, I would like to give the administration an opportunity to weigh in a little more on that, but it is gonna require a board. I mean, I don't wanna open this can of worms just yet, but it's a conversation similar to what we're talking about with school consolidation. When you look at what's going on in the budget, they're saying, if we need to cut positions, we need guidance from you.
Right.
And, you know, we're gonna come to the board and say, this conversation needs to happen, not 6 weeks from now. This conversation needs to happen soon. And it's around, not just, I mean, it should be around consolidation in my opinion, but it should also be around, how do we wait? Do we cut a teacher here or do we cut a teacher there? Where are those resources being allocated? Because right now, what we're looking at in the budget is very limited. And administration doesn't have the power to say, we cut this position or that. I mean, they do have that power, but
You have to provide.
we should at least provide them some guidance as to how to address that.
Yeah, especially for here, these were all positions that were one time only, they were,
Sure.
and so,
And
and some of them are very important, I'm not saying they're
Yeah.
not. But there needs to be something that the board provides to help make those decisions and guide the
Right.
decisions that.
And I don't want to speak on behalf of the finance committee, but that's my take on what we discussed, and I wouldn't want to put words in the administration's.
Sure.
But
No, absolutely.
I definitely think that we are trying to address this, and it is definitely an issue that should be coming soon.
Okay,
So,
But
yes,
and also on this budget development, this is extremely complicated just by the state and, the weighting and the phase in over 5 years and the percentage and all of this. So we really need, as a board, we need something to react on rather than saying, there's 9 positions that we're not going to fill that are extremely important. No, that's not going to happen. There may be ways to manipulate all of that, and that's up to the business manager and superintendent to try to help guide the finance committee a little bit as to how this process proceeds. But I don't want to see it that we as a board are now saying, we have to rank these things which are not going to happen, because that's not the way it's done right now. So it may come to that, but not all.
Mary Heather.
I guess I just want to follow that up with, of course, it's a symbiotic relationship. We're going to, get their expertise on how best to kind of cover the bases and pay for the things that need to be paid for. But I do think as a board, we have a responsibility to look at the allocation of our collective resources for the equity markets. And that is our responsibility. That is our fundamental responsibility.
Absolutely, and that came up. That came up today, and we have to calibrate that in some way that is based on some kind of data that is going to be helpful. That's not totally simple to do, and it may not be something we do just for this budget cycle, but it may be something that we do over a period of time so that it's not just fixed.
and I mean, we discussed this in the finance committee, we want to provide data-driven decisions, and that is something that the board has said. We want data-driven decisions. And in finance, it's not clear, it's not easy, it's very complicated, and to try to give you data on that takes a little time.
Absolutely.
You know, and sorry, there is a point where you can't, you know, when somebody says, explain this to me like I'm a fifth grader, sorry, can't do that. This is just way too complicated in some of these areas. So,
Thank you. And and I wasn't expecting it to be done by any means.
yeah,
It's just more that putting the responsibility on the board to help in this process to make those hard decisions. And so it's just gonna be hard work to do this year.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Okay,
All right.
yes.
Thank you, Matt. And we have an update on the strategic plan.
I'm gonna start us off, I think. So Matt and Tim and Courtney, Nicole and I have been talking a bunch over the past few weeks of how to both honor all the work that's happened over the last 2 years, so many community members that we brought together who have not lost at board meetings, how do we move forward? So I'm gonna share a bunch of emails, which is what this feels like. So I am rarely in front of you because I do my job well, other people represent to you, but I was the one that really oversaw from a staff perspective, engaging the public at different points. So I want to just give you a high level. I hope that none of this is new information. I feel like Emma's presented this a few times to you before. We've heard reports from our co-chairs before, but I do want to situate us in some of the most important things. There were 3 main bullet points that we wanted to bring to you. I think I can remember them. So there were 2 major phases of ACSD stakeholder engagement, the advisory committee and the action team. We got lost in our A's. It was hard to keep them separate, but those were the 2 main groups that came together. At each time, in each of those groups, we really made intentional efforts to engage traditionally underrepresented members of the ACSD community. And at all phases of the strategic plan, all of these phases have been rooted in equity. So I just want to tell you a little bit about what that looked like. So when we put out the call for folks to come to the table, oftentimes that looks like an email and posting it on our website, and whoever shows up, that's great. In this case, we specifically talked to principals, talked to teachers, talked to staff members, and said, who do you think would come to the table if we asked? So at the advisory committee in particular, we had a primarily Spanish-speaking parent, so that meant that the entire process, we brought an interpreter to every single meeting. We had a Spanish translation at every single step of the way. And because we built such a great relationship with that member, she brought many of her community members in, brought them to the table, was able to answer questions. So I just want you to know that that's the depth of work that we did with individual communities. That work also notably led to the creation of our multilingual liaison position, which Fernanda Canales, a former principal, holds. That could have been an action step, and I hope it would have been in the strategic plan if ESSER hadn't allowed us to do that early. Caitlin and Courtney and I just met with Fernanda earlier at the end of last week. The amount of work that she has been able to do with our Spanish-speaking families and increasingly with our Chinese and Burmese-speaking families is it's amazing. This is work that wasn't being done. It's simple stuff like signing folks up, signing their kids up for sports that they wouldn't have done. This is the important work that I think we all want to do. I also want to say, you know, when we got all of the applications in, I color coded them all. So we asked about things like, you know, what school are you in and what town are you from? But also if you or your child have experience with disability or mental health issues, or if you are BIPOC or if you are LGBTQ+, so we actually had folks self-identify if you have you know, lived at or near poverty. So we had folks identify in the application process, and I really looked at all of them to see how can we get the most diverse group together. And if there were folks that were duplicates in some way, we chose the folks who hadn't been at tables before, because we have a history of inviting the same people over and over for years. Then Emma and I would meet, and sometimes then other staff members that were doing this work and I would meet, and then Emma went to her consultant. She also hired out a diversity expert to be her consultant. So we looked at the folks who were bringing to the table several times over when we did that. And the last piece is that at each of the advisory committee and the action team, we intentionally had co-chairs, both a student and an adult co-chair. And during the process, Emma and I would meet with those two co-chairs in between each of the meetings to say, what went well, what didn't, what do you think we should clarify for next time? And part of the intention of that was to really elevate student voice. So we have 3 members on the advisory committee, 3 student members on the advisory committee. We increased that to 4 from the action team. So I hope that paints a little bit of a picture of the last 2 years. I was the one that wrote and sent and posted much of this material. If I hadn't, I probably wouldn't have received all of this. So I understand that you've heard a lot, and this work is a lot. And even if you go onto the strategic plan page, it's hard to really get a sense of what this work was. I've been to almost every meeting, and we brought people to the table that haven't been there, and it was really exciting. The last piece of that is that Emma really encouraged us through the whole process to sort of get away from thinking, what can we actually do within what we have here? So that's part of the reason that the strategic plan looks the way it is, because it wasn't a bunch of administrators sitting in a room and thinking about what we can actually do with what we have. It was the wishes from our community. So the advisory committee was the first part of the plan. So basically their work was to gather the biggest universe of information you can possibly imagine and try to distill it into recommendations to the board. So you all, many of you were in that picture, took that information in October of 22 and basically voted to approve 3 strategic plan goals based on that work. So that's really hard work too, right? Distilling all of those recommendations down into your 3 goals. You also did a mission, vision, equity definition. I think that that's now on page 3 of the strategic plan draft. Then you sent it to the action team, and their job was to actually take those 3 goals and to put some more concrete information to it. So then what I was talking about in the beginning is, where we felt like we were when we went back to the room to say, how do we move forward next? So we could say, hey, these are unclear, we need to rewrite them. Let's put it aside and redo this whole thing. I should go on to the next thing. We're going to present those 2 options. So basically, when we looked at this fork in the road and how we can move the board to a place where you feel like you have something you feel good voting on, we felt like we really heard specificity around goal 3 coming out loud and clear, and that you needed that specific goal to be rearranged. And honestly, we got into the room together and it didn't feel great to redraft a goal that you had written and that had come from all of the work of these folks who had come to the table. But that was where we put most of our effort. There were also some things that have been emailed in the last few hours in particular that maybe those little tweaks are things that could go into still staying within option 1. And that leaves us on the same basic timeline. I think you could approve at the next board meeting or the one after that. So we stay generally in the same timeline. And the other is more of a question mark. How much do you want to dig back in? How much do you want to rewrite the goals? And how much do you want to rewrite all the work that was done? And hand over to Nicole.
Nicole didn't know when she was jumping in.
It's live for.
Oh, wonderful. So I do want to say that I think it's been a month since we've talked about this with all of you, that this didn't emerge from the beginning. When we kept going back to do more than this, what it felt like is there were 4 administrators, sometimes 5, sitting in a room making a lot of decisions. And it felt so different than the original intent, which was meeting after meeting with stakeholders from all over the community, with the action team sitting quietly and listening for 2 hours to people talking about what it's like to live in poverty and come to school, what it's like to raise a child with special needs, what it's like to be a member of the BIPOC community. And so this is not an attempt to abdicate our responsibility. It was an attempt to say, if it's not this, then it's bigger than just having 4 administrators sit in a room, sometimes 5, sit in a room and make a new plan. So I just want to be really clear about how we landed there. Oh, PowerPoint. So when we talk about choice 1, where we got to, the 5 of us, is that goal 3 needed a little more specificity about academic proficiency. And we chose to tie it to the educational achievement gap. And some of you have already seen the presentation. The data is rich. It goes all the way back. Not a lot has changed. And this is true across the United States. It's not unique to ACSD. We also really felt it was important to retain the intent and work of the stakeholder, because as far as any of us knew at the time, it was the first time that ACSD had created such a robust, diverse group where parents and community members and students were explaining their experience and looking at quantitative data about the district. And so that felt really powerful as a next move. And then thirdly, the idea of choice one is that the plan, if you chose to approve it, it would move forward to an implementation team. As Emily said, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to my right side. I can be a better teacher.
You're fine.
We, as a group, did not write an implementation plan. The group was deliberately told not to write an implementation plan, and so there isn't an implementation plan to you, because the original idea is if the plan were approved, the superintendent would design an implementation team, would determine who would be on that team, and then what they would do with the plan. So as we talked about all of these things in this presentation, we realized we needed a visual, and so we thought maybe you could use a visual too, because there's a lot. And so what we kept coming back to is the understanding that the three goals of the board, they really blend into each other. There's no one goal that stands on its own. There's no such thing as just being academically successful. That's a myth. There's also no such thing as just belonging, right? So belonging and academic success go hand in hand in schools. And they also go with access, that we couldn't uncouple them. But when we bring them together, as you can see in this blended, they actually support the board's vision. And so we wanted to stake a claim to say, the work that was done was an attempt to say, for students to reach their full learning potential, they need belonging. Every child needs to feel safe, welcome, and included. Without those three, learning doesn't happen. But every child also needs to be inspired, prepared, and reach proficiency. And then thirdly, even though it's goal 2, so I went out of order, that for this to happen, students need equitable, sustainable, and fiscally responsible access to resources. So we hope this shows that the goals don't stand next to each other, they feed each other and support each other. Do I keep going?
One more.
All right. So in terms of the goals, when we talk about belonging and access, we did not dig into those. We didn't dig into them because we were a small group focused on goal 3, because that's what we've heard the majority of the feedback was about. But we do want to name that goal 1, belonging, is academic. Anyone who's reading the most current research about how kids learn, how adults learn, belonging is at the center. So what students learn, when they feel a sense of belonging, when their sense of belonging happens, it positively impacts their academic achievement, and it's key to their positive experiences in school. The research we just cited 4, but it could have gone on much longer than that. Secondly, access to instructional resources are an essential ingredient. I didn't cite this one because it felt really obvious. The kids need to feel a sense of belonging, but they also need to have access to resources. And when those two things are combined with academics, that's when learning happens.
The first paragraph up here is goal 3 as it's currently written. ACSD's learning environment will inspire a passion for learning and value diverse identities and abilities while preparing our students to make positive contributions to the community and beyond. As Nicole mentioned and Emily, 4 or 5 of us looked at a lot of data. We looked at local screener data going back 10 years. We heard people in this room say we need measures in this goal. It felt intimidating to try and identify what those numbers should be, but at the end of the day, the data pretty much seemed to repeat itself. So we are suggesting this addition, which feels like a big and important addition. ACSD will raise each grade cohort, so third grade is a grade cohort, fourth grade is a grade cohort. Math and literacy proficiency levels to 80% proficient by 2029, as measured by the VT-CAP, which is our new state assessment tool. And the achievement gap between the general population and historically marginalized students. We specifically identified families who identify as needing free or reduced lunch, students served by an IEP, and our BIPOC students in that historically marginalized group of students. And we said that that gap will be decreased by 50% for each of those grade cohorts over those 5 years in both math and literacy. Using our 2023 data, which has just been released internally from last spring. What is the achievement gap? The educational achievement gap is best understood as the persistent gap, as Nicole said, in ACSD and really in most public school districts in this country, between the gap in achievement between educationally marginalized, and we were using the term educationally centered students. If they're not at the margins, they're probably at the center. And in ACSD, this gap most impacts students identified for an IEP, living in or near poverty, and minoritized because of race and or ethnicity. This slide takes me a little bit to orient myself to. I apologize if I start talking and you're trying to process, but up in the right-hand corner, color-coded, the light blue and the maroon represent students who scored proficient or above. There's a really faint dotted line that goes through these charts. So the maroon, anything above the maroon and the light blue are proficient or proficient with distinction. These are our 2022 state assessments, which are released for public use. Below that dotted line, partially proficient or substantially below proficient. We chose the 3rd and 8th grade cohorts because, as discussed in this room before, 3rd grade's a critical year. It's a pivotal point between learning to read and reasoning to learn. And 8th grade is an indicator of high school preparedness. So over here, 2022 spring, ELA, English Language Arts, 73.6 of our 3rd graders who were represented by historically marginalized populations were below proficient, and compared to non-historically marginalized students, 40.26 of whom were below that line. And the gap is obviously the difference between those two numbers. 8th grade's over here. Now when we go to math, over here we have 90.57% of our historically marginalized students below proficient in math. I feel like when this transferred to PowerPoint, it lost the headings, but this is math, 3rd grade and 8th grade. Any questions before we go on to the last part of this?
I don't know what the next part is.
Could I ask?
Steve.
When you say, given the numbers we just saw, when you say numbers like 80%, is that aspirational or do you think that is achievable? Because 6 years to solve a problem like that.
We talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
We don't have a crystal ball. We know it's a really big goal. We thought a lot about collective efficacy and what we want to believe is possible for our students. We didn't want to set an easy goal. And I would say, I don't know for sure, but that's where we landed. It was a short period of time. We looked at a lot of data and went back and forth about what numbers would make sense. And if you're closing that achievement gap at the rate we set, it's going to raise your overall rate. But there's a lot of questions in there for sure. I don't know how other committee members or whether
We're committee
members
members.
would respond.
It's ambitious.
I was not sure.
We did not prepare for this, but I did go in and look at the data for 2021 and 2018, right? So before the pandemic and after. Our numbers have held pretty steadily for these two groups.
We did also talk about the importance of like really documenting what we're trying, regardless of what the goal or the number is, documenting what are we doing, what are we trying, and if this is our goal, if X is our goal, putting that lens on all the decisions we make. And then each year or quarterly or over time looking at, are we making progress? What's a little tricky with the state assessment results is they're annual, but we have screener data that mostly aligns with this. And we're prepared, I think, to be honest and transparent about progress we're making and going back to the drawing board with our approaches.
That is an important point you're making, that we chose not to put in here in an attempt to be brief and focused, is that we have 10 years of screener data for grades K through 5, and it supports, it tells the same story. Okay, so choice one. So this idea of reshaping and adding, raising proficiency to 80%, and then closing the gap. By the way, historically marginalized is defined by Vermont, it's not defined by us. This is their definition. On a timeline, it would look like approval. It would then, this is where the superintendent would build an implementation team. It's not defined anywhere what or who or how. My understanding or our understanding is that that is for the superintendent to work towards. And then that team could begin working and providing quarterly updates to the board. Choice 2 might feel vague. It's not vague to avoid. It's vague because, again, the idea of the 4 or 5 of us rewriting anything significant was a difficult one to imagine and to do. And so choice 2 considerations, it provides time and space for you all to consider your goals. We wrote here to rewrite, but it might not be rewrite. We should have written review. There's an option for school administrators to come into a more centralized role, revising the strategies and action steps. And it would likely shift implementation. Things in schools rarely move quickly, though when they're important, they can move more quickly than other things. And so as we thought about what that would look like, because we were trying to figure out, how does this really compare to not doing this? The way we saw it, the way we humbly saw it, sitting in a room week after week, would be writing new goals or not, reviewing the goals at a minimum. There would then need to be some sort of strategic plan, strategies, and action steps redrafted, because the idea of choice 2 is it's not choice 1. So figuring out with the old or the new goals, what is the strategic plan? We envisioned it would take, I mean, this is really generous, talk about aspirational, but we envisioned a couple of months, and that there could be a vote here in March with implementation team being set up in May of 2024. And again, this is us doing our best job with what we know about how long it takes to bring people into a room and all the things that are already on people's plates. And so as the 4 or 5 of us sat and thought about these 2 choices, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what we would recommend, and we landed with the minor adjustments
to the current draft strategic plan with a focus on adding the specificity to goal 3 and the timeline for approving the plan being retained.
Thank you so much, right? Coming up with, your recommendation. I guess maybe something that would help me, I don't know if it help others. Since we never went through a strategic plan process before, most of us, some of us have, is more what do we expect that implementation to look like? And in my mind, and I could be making this up and do that well, by the time you guys, this team does the implementation plan, it'll look more traditional, like the plan that we've seen before. Because it has, okay, we're measuring things, and this is what we're measuring, this is the results year over year, so we're tracking our progress. So I'm wondering if, where I might be getting hung up is, this is the input to that implementation, and what we've seen in the past has really been a combination of the goals of the board coupled with, the actual implementation plan. Am I missing something?
To be totally transparent, I got stuck in the same place as we were going through the process, looking at Caitlin and Emily, because they were in the room, where I would be like, well, is this realistic? Can we do this? What does it look like to implement it? And the decision was to not figure out implementation. And so I had a similar imagining as you, is that the meat of it happens in implementation at the superintendent's discretion, right? That a group comes together and looks, this is how I imagine it.
Okay.
Looks at the strategies, looks at the action steps, and really weighs them. Some of them take priority over others for a host of reasons. Some there's clear evidence and research supporting. Others it's not as clear, and so that's what the implementation team would do, and then determine how do you measure that? How would we know we're getting there?
Yeah.
So I had a similar imagining.
Okay, and so then my question would be, what role would the board play during that process with the quarterly updates? What kind of input could we, potentially have? That kind of thing, where we haven't just thrown it over the wall and hope for the best of what comes back, that it still has some collaboration there of, yes, this is what our intent was. And, but, being able to say, but how are we gonna know that we did that? Because I always ask those questions. So, I'm just wondering if we're getting hung up on semantics and because it doesn't look like the plan I saw that's up, and when I first got on the board, it's all detailed, it has all of these specific measurable, somewhat measurable items underneath, which we haven't got to, whereas I don't personally think, the goals, I think, are fine goals. It's just really been, and then the action steps and the strategies are really good things. I think what I'm looking for is, I guess, the implementation plan. And I could be totally wrong, and maybe others feel something different here. But that's how I've been thinking about this a lot, right? And yeah, I'll shut up now. Very good.
Well, I guess, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think the discomfort that a lot of us are feeling is that question of like, but how will we know? And, what are the beams that we're counting, and how often will we be counting them? And we want that assurance, and I think, even just as a special education parent, like when you make a plan for your child in an IEP, you want specific, measurable goals, and so I think that's the tangible thing that we're looking for. However, I think in developing, taking a goal and translating it to action steps and how those things will be measured is in fact the work of education professionals, which most of us aren't. And so that's where I really want to pump the brakes on the board being really involved at that level, because we're not the experts, we can say what we would like to see, and I think it's very appropriate to focus, especially a strategic plan that is talking about an equity lens, to focus on the achievement gap in our community. It seems very appropriate, in addition to raising everybody. So, I mean, I think making these kind of specific changes to a goal makes a lot of sense to put a little more meat on it so that we can turn to the educators and say, okay, how will we get there and what are we going to measure to know? But I personally don't feel like I would be bringing much to that conversation if I were sitting at the table with them and saying, well, aren't you going to use, whatever measurement so whatever test with Cup Johnson? I don't really know. So I feel like in some ways I'm compelled to lean on our professionals to get us there, to get us a really good plan with connective tissue. And that's not to say, I mean, to sort of talk to Mary Sozar's point, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're advocating holding the administration accountable. I think we're holding them accountable by having, expectations about regular reporting and asking good questions and getting on top of that. I think we're just being realistic about who the experts are with respect to demonstrating proficiency in the district.
Okay, Tricia and then Steve.
Yeah, so back to, some of you had said we were asking, how does the board interact with this in future steps? And I don't know that there was an answer, or I don't know if anyone knows that answer, but I too am curious. But I absolutely support what Mary Heather is saying, that we are providing oversight and accountability, but we aren't the experts. And it does feel appropriate to me to lean on our resources, which are our educators and people who know what the measurements are and what can be implemented and all of that stuff. So I think my question is, if we were to amazingly approve this tonight, moving forward, what is next as far as intersections in the board? How would that work out? Who might answer that?
I can imagine it for you.
Well, and so is that something that the board needs to set and say, so I feel like at this point, we're all a little bit like, and what's next?
You have to help us.
Yeah. I don't want to, do you want to?
Well, you have work plan that you're
Yes.
involved in.
Yep.
And on there is that section on strategic plan and presentations to the board about progress on the strategic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, just a quick clarification, so those are presentations on here are our measurements and here's how we're moving forward, or so once we make this decision, we are not involved again until we start receiving data? Is that?
Yeah, what you would be approving is the direction you want us to head.
Yeah.
Not the course.
Right.
We'll map out the course. But you're presenting the direction you want us to head. You're giving your updates on how that direction is going.
Yeah.
And how we're getting to where you'd like us to be. How we're getting to 80% efficiency. And where we're having successes, where we're having less successes. And we're just gonna be honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
No one here is gonna be blowing smoke about student achievement.
Yeah.
I promise you.
Well, you can't.
Well, you can. You can try, but it won't be very
I
successful.
don't think there's anything wrong with what you just said, just trying to get some clarity as far as what we're looking for.
To Mary Heather's point, I'm a trained educator, I feel relatively confident doing this, and I absolutely want no part. Because it's not my role on the board. We get set a direction, and we should trust these professionals, that's why we hired them to do this, and I think that the board at great peril steps into this and says, this is how you're gonna do it. Because we have a really high level view of this, and those guys know much better what's going on with them. So, yeah, don't feel that it's because you don't know what's going on in the school. No, it's not our role. It's not what we were appointed to do. It's what we hired them to do. And we should not be messing around with anybody.
So Jamie and then Chip.
Um,
And Suzanne, did you have your hand up as well? Oh, I mean,
You next?
no,
Now I'm confused because I feel like we're having two different conversations. I basically agree that, like trusting professional sounds brilliant to me. I don't know the extent to which education professionals have looked at this plan and said, this is great too. I don't really understand that. But I feel like this is, what we're looking at today is basically the same thing we looked at a month ago. Goal 3 is a new sentence, and by 80%, which I totally think is great. But I feel like a lot of us were sort of surprised, and confused, and frustrated, and whatever about the state of this document a month ago. Basically, nothing has changed. That's a weird. So I guess I feel like I like option 2, kind of. I think our goals are pretty good. Like, I think it was Nicole that, you talked a lot about the goals, the 3 points of light, sort of. I mean, totally agree. I needed no convincing that those were good. But there's a lot of things that we all seem to suggest we're missing in this document that are still very missing. Context, I'm confused how the process happened. I sent 3.5 pages of very detailed comments. Did anyone see those?
Did you send them to the full board?
No, I sent them to Emma, and then they sent to you guys. Okay. So this is not like a me thing, like I'm right or whatever, but like none of those suggestions were even have been incorporated at all, which is fine. I don't know if anyone else did this kind of stuff or not. And I just feel like this requires more time. And it feels like we took so much time to make this first pass that just handing it over to do it in a quicker version sort of isn't really in the spirit of what we've been going for. So I don't want to be like, oh, I'm against the administration, they want option 1. But I feel like I do want more time to make a more robust document. This feels still insufficient to me. It still feels like it leaves a lot, some of which is way too detailed, and some of which is way too vague. And I feel like that gap is really important to figure out.
After that part, just because I've been, so basically my role was to take all of this stuff and put it in a document.
Right.
And so it'd be helpful to understand what it sounds like you're suggesting is that any edits individual board members suggested, you were hoping to hear in the strategic plan draft.
No, I just, there's a few things in here that many of us suggested should change.
And if you want to change that, I think the board discussing that and deciding to change that would be, that would be an appropriate step, but having individual board members make suggestions that then get incorporated without a board discussion, I imagine would not be what.
No, I'm not for that. I'm not for me rewriting the strategic plan. I was just curious how the process happens and how we can make input. I don't know how else to do it besides email people. And then I heard back from Emma, she's like, look, it's too late, I can't do this. That's all I heard back. And so I don't know where that email was.
and that was what we were instructed to do back a couple months ago, was to provide,
By a certain date.
by a certain day.
Okay.
There's a lot.
Yes, so,
Okay,
yes,
who's next?
Ellie, Suzanne, Brian, but I don't know who was first.
Oh, can I get
Thank you. So I'm gonna, Suzanne.
Suzanne, and then it was me, and then I think.
Oh, and Chip.
So, when we first started with this, with Dr. Burrows, he did say that the implementation at that point was a pretty plan. But that would then with suggestions from the board would go to the implementation team for them write specific goals, well, we have goals, but, breaking down into smaller goals, objectives, and places to strive for, achieve. So that conversation has been here since day one. I do like, and I think that the change to goal 3 is, it's gonna take everybody, not just the students, not just the parents, not just the teachers and staff, it's gonna take more than a village. Because those gaps have been there forever, and it's gonna take a lot of work to get there. But the other piece is that it's not the board's role to tell administration how and what they need to use to achieve these goals. We give the information of what we want to our superintendent, who is our one employee, and then he then works with his staff to make sure that happens. And we hear if that's happening based on the reports. And if you get reports saying we're going backwards, then breaks go on and we say, oh, wait a minute, it's looking up forward, not backwards. So how do we right the ship and move it in the positive direction? But I'm fine with choice 1, especially now that we changed that to very aggressive. But I'll get on the boat, Chip.
Yeah, I agree, everybody except Jamie.
Ouch.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think at some point, there is compromise constantly in writing any kind of document. Whether it's too specific or too whatever, there is, between the people or the person who's writing it, or putting actually the words down and trying to put it together. So I'm one for saying, let's go with number 1. I think, there are choices that the board has made, and this is where budgeting comes into things too. And budgets, if we're looking at budgets, not just one way, but again, with the whole equity component, we're gonna have to give and take on that. But if we're looking at a goal that we've just set and expanded upon in number 3, there's some budgetary things in there that may be extremely important. And we as a board then have to make a choice as to whether that gets included or not, if that's gonna help reach this, I think, pretty high goal. So, I don't know where we go next if we go to number 2. I like the goal, I loved your, whatever that circle graph with the center, because in fact, that's all true. Totally, I know it's such common sense, and yet we spend a lot of time talking about all this stuff over time, and I don't want to keep rehashing it, just because I don't think we're gonna get there. So, anyway, I would support number 1.
Is Ellie next? Ellie, Brian, and Joanna.
Okay, Ellie.
We're all getting past 8:30, how much more time do you allocate to this discussion?
So I'm okay with my report, rescheduling that for another night. And there's nothing there that's critical. I can kind of send you an email, kind of just expectations about Wednesday. You don't have to take up board time to do like a work plan, you can make it up on another agenda.
Point of order, please. I would suggest that people who have already been in line be heard. Then you cut.
That's true. Yeah.
So, looking at these goals, 1, 2, and 3, I feel like it would be hard for me to vote to move this forward without some expansion on goal 1 and goal 2. And the reason that is, it doesn't surprise me that goal 3 is almost expanded on, because it's an education thing and there's educators working on this, and that is clear that that's where that expertise is. But these other areas around access and belonging are not necessarily the thing that educators
teachers are the people that have the information about, like, access is a lot about infrastructure and poverty and geography and other things that teachers aren't necessarily the people that are gonna solve those problems. And then belonging is mental health, community education, programming, hiring staff that represent, different people in our community. Things, again, that educators aren't really the people who are necessarily going to be able to come up with the best ways to approach that. And so I just feel like it wouldn't be fair for us to throw this to a committee of implementation teams of educators that work for us without, or work for the district without first kind of outlining how or what we expect to see for these other areas that we might have to find expertise of people who know how to address those problems.
I have 3 quick points. One is, if I could, I would eliminate the word equity and much rather talk about equality of opportunity. Secondly, and maybe I misinterpreted, but the strategic plan for an entire district should not be based upon one group of students historically marginalized. I misinterpreted there. Sorry, but that's what I heard. And lastly, I would go with number 2.
Joanna, did you put your hand up?
Yes, I'm trying to just think about how I want to say this. Is there like a 1A option or like a 1.5? I think we need to acknowledge that there were 2 significant flaws in this process. Having the action team dissolve before hearing board feedback and being able to incorporate as a team was a significant flaw because we were asked for feedback in August. We gave feedback, and then we're essentially looking at the same draft that was presented in August, not just a month ago. So I think and I can understand and totally appreciate why that happened, but just in terms of designing future strategic plans, that loop and that circle should have been closed, or we wouldn't be having this conversation today. I think we wouldn't be sort of stuck in this. And I am really confused why so many board members were uncomfortable a month ago about moving this forward. And we're looking at the exact same document, except for 2 added sentences. And now we're okay passing it on because we're sort of backed into a corner. I mean, to me, that just is like the definition of rubber stamping. And I totally appreciate not wanting to do the work of the administration. And I want you to do it. I trust you to do it. But charting a course and having a goal should have a little more details, like, do we want to dynamite that mountain? Do we want, like, we should have a little more meat on this in order to, for me to say, like, yes, this is the strategic plan, because it's not really a strategic plan. There's really great stuff in here, but the action team seems to be doing a lot of the work of the advisory committee. So I guess I'm confused of how those 2 different, really well-formed and really proud of how we put those 2 teams together, but how they work symbiotically. It seemed like not enough action happened with the action team. And the other thing I'm really uncomfortable with is having an interim superintendent. So much of this is falling on the superintendent. The number of times I heard the word superintendent leading, the superintendent making the decision, superintendent, and we don't have a permanent superintendent. So that's one other part of this that makes me really uncomfortable with just the timing. And I wish I could say more about what the 0.5 is, but I really think what Ellie was saying, having metrics in the other 2 goals, and I can totally appreciate how success in goal 1 and 2 can be measured in goal 3. I can appreciate how 80% achievement is measurable by feeling belonging, is measurable by having access. But we need to have what does success look like in goal 1 and 2 be really more explicit.
So, for me, it's about, I guess, the sequence of how things happen from here. I agree completely that it is not our role to define what happens next. But I want to know what happens next. I want the right people to give me the information. Like, I would like to see in all three goals, metrics and action steps, even if it's defined very vaguely. And, you know, before we say, oh, this looks great, we're going to print 200 color copies of this, you know. I want it to be included in that. And I'm okay with waiting a little bit to give professionals, you're like, we're sitting there with, you know, hundreds of pages of data where you're, you know, like the coffee pots, like brewing, and like to give you the time you need to like, what are the metrics that we want to use and what are the action steps? And I would pretty much be okay with anything you tell me, but I want to see that in the strategic plan is my perspective. I think everything that's been done today has been done really well. There's some flaws in the, you know, people graduating or moving on from their jobs, and I agree with that, but overall, I feel like this has been a really big undertaking and that all the information in here is quite valuable. But yeah, that's for me. Like, I would not feel comfortable, I would vote no to this because I feel like it's missing action steps and metrics. But everything that's in there is fantastic, you know? So that's kind of where I stand on it. Just want the next, and to give you guys the time, I'm saying administration, where it's not rushed, where it's not feeling aspirational, and you have to put like the most important parts of your jobs on hold, you know, so it's somewhat realistic.
So has everyone had a chance to speak? Jason?
I am confused why we are asking the administration to help us craft a strategy document when the strategy and setting the strategy is entirely the responsibility of the school board, not the responsibility of the administration. And along those same lines, you should not be including action steps or specifics about implementation in the strategy document. And this document still has very specific action steps that are not strategic in any way, shape, or form. So, and I thought we had several folks talk about that last time, and I feel like we have to put together a process. It's our responsibility. We should not be pushing it on anybody else. We as a board need to make this strategy document what we want it and how we want it, and we should set the process. It's not up to anyone else to tell us how to do it. It's up to us to do it. So.
And to add additional goal to the, I add statements to the goals, it's really our job to people.
Our current one has action steps and metrics, and they didn't all come from the board.
Well,
It was a collaboration. It was.
Well, I think, yeah, I think what we're seeing is a combination, like I was talking with what we see here is a combination of the strategic planning work the board did with the implementation, when we look at the old version. And I think that's what's really confusing me anyway, as to what this needs to look like. But the fact that they updated for us goal 3, thank you. But that's something that we really should have thought of collaborating. Is this reasonable? Because we can't, you can do that in a vacuum. Right? But as Jason indicated, there were several items like, very detailed that are on here that we had talked about, because nurse in every school and several others that are very prescriptive, which I agree with Jason, doesn't really fall into a strategy and a vision. So next steps is, and I'm looking at the board, because I think it's our responsibility to come up with that next step. Mary Heather?
I guess I would just want to make a suggestion, because it seems like several on board are comfortable with the suggested option one, make some revisions to the third goal, and then give it to the administration to develop a implementation team to then flush that out, add more connective tissue to this thing. And then there are some on the board, many on the board, who feel like they don't want to vote on anything until it has more connective tissue. And so it seems to me like what I'm hearing is that there's several on the board who want an implementation team to, or maybe the board to become the implementation team to flesh it out a little bit more, but that there's some folks that don't want to vote on it until it's, got more flesh out.
I think I'm hearing
I
a
guess
little
my
bit.
suggestion would be to, I don't know, somehow take a vote on which direction we go.
And, what I'm hearing is a little bit different, and serving is a little bit different. I think, is there more that we need to do to the other two goals? Do we have some goals to? And maybe that's not possible. For Christian.
So it seems to me like there's still much more discussion that needs to happen than we can fit in tonight's meeting. And that this has been touched on enough times within these larger full meetings that really it seems like we need a working meeting specifically on strategic plan just to get on the same page and figure out where we're going. I think we're not at a point where we can even make a decision to move on to because everything is, I don't think there's any real consensus. I think there's still a lot of questions. And I think there's still a lot of gray area. I would recommend, as much as we have a lot of on our plates right now, it still seems like putting aside specific time for a working meeting to address this would be advisable.
I mean, I can ask, question, and I guess the question I was gonna ask before we ask it, is just to state it, is we can do a poll, as Mary Heather suggested, to see, how many would really like to move forward with the suggestion with one, option one. I wouldn't necessarily say, it's option two, it's
Not option one.
Yeah,
Option one or not option
or
one.
1A. Steve,
Since this is an action item, I will take a motion that we adopt option one, and implementation team to do, execute that.
is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, additional discussion?
Is this an action item? It wasn't warned as an action. It wasn't warned as an action, so we can't take action.
But the administration is asking for.
That's next week.
Actually,
Next, yeah, so what I was gonna do is a poll and not necessarily an action.
It's not an action item, I withdraw my.
Sorry.
Well,
So how many, folks basically want to move, and this is just a poll, want to move the plan forward per administration's recommendation? Just raise a hand. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I get everybody? And
I think 5.
Five.
Yes, 5.
Raise your hands again.
Raise.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Tricia.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Tricia.
yeah.
It's okay, no worries.
Sorry, I can't see in the corner here. And how many folks would like to form a working meeting to look at this?
That the alternative for a meeting?
Well,
I'm just asking.
Well, I mean, it's.
No.
How did you get it done?
You can have a subcommittee
Or it could be a,
Small group, focus on this and work on it and bring it back to the board to
we could do a
synthesize
subcommittee
all this together.
that made up of the board in this case. So all in favor of having a working group of some sort, made up a board, to take a look at this, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, and I didn't vote. So it looks like, so is the preference to have a subcommittee to look at this? Then, I mean, as far, it's not the whole board, we want a smaller working group, and if so, if you're interested, send me an email. If you can dedicate some time to it. And it's gonna happen, I wanna have it happen quickly. As far as when you get together,
In conjunction with the superintendent search.
of course, yeah.
Without a whole bunch.
Thank you, guys.
Presuming that those
Yes, absolutely.
It would be an
Yes, sir. It would be an ad.
I feel like if we were going to create an anti this board, it would be diagram declaration. So is that a motion that is being made?
With the, yes, what do we, this
I think that someone should make that motion.
okay, someone make a motion.
Make the motion for an ad hoc committee titled strategic plan working group. Be formed.
Any discussion?
We would want feedback or results from them by our next regular meeting, or when, what is the deadline for?
We could. I'm not just put words in people's mouths.
In addition to that answer, also like a specific charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And no, I think I thought in there, what will
So what is this?
The specific charge would be to synthesize board feedback and incorporate it into the new strategic plan that reflects that feedback. So you can have a majority of board members comfortable with this. We're not there yet.
So is that part of the motion? It is, I'll second.
It's
Yeah,
That's
it's
just
discussion.
the
Charge.
So,
That's the chart.
So there are parts of this that I feel that board members aren't the right people to do it. So as far as the board members sitting down and synthesizing this information, I foresee there being sections where we might know the category of information we seek perhaps, but there's no way that we are the right people to fill that in. So metrics, anything that involves metrics, I feel like we have experts who can do that. So I don't know how to word that within the charge of the committee. Perhaps that would be identifying information that's needed. So what you said, but that there might be information needed, but from the right professional, the right person.
I think it would have to have support from the team here to meet with us.
Have representatives.
You know, I took Joanna's point in particular about not having a feedback loop for the action team, and I think I may be getting my chronology wrong, but they presented this to in August, and then no one gave us specific feedback, and so the things that Emma presented on, like Emma came back twice to present back to the board on things that had been suggested, and there I think were 4 things that she brought forward, so I think it makes sense, then we got emails at different times that came in after that time had passed. And so, had those come in at the time that we had asked them, we would have come back and incorporated those things into this draft. So it's hard for me not to make changes, right? Hearing people having concerns and recognizing and giving you the same document. But that was because of the process. And so I just don't want you all to go down the road where you're doing this kind of work. If the work to be done is to gather all of the feedback that you've given so far and to synthesize that and then to give it to us. I just feel like we can go down the road for
Joanna?
Just two things. I had brought this up in my head maybe, but not out loud. That having sort of the blessing of the action team and all of the people on the action team, I would love to get the advisory committee, but I know that's many iterations past. But having part of the working group incorporate whoever could still be gathered from that action team saying it, yeah, actually that's what we were hoping for. And it just reads more like a strategy now as a group. So I do want to honor not putting words in the action team's mouth. Like, I don't think that's anybody's goal here is to, steamroll the action team. But we also did have a meeting that Emma presented, and there were lots of people that gave her feedback, in person, like to her face, that didn't get. So I can understand like not putting it in writing, but there was a lot of feedback that was given to look at all of the pieces of this, to then put it together. And that didn't. So I don't know how productive that is, but we did have a meeting about it. So just because it wasn't in an email.
Lindsay, and then
I thought that there was a whole other part of the process. There was like the strategic plan for equity, and I just feel like I thought that was the strategic plan for equity, and that would be a piece of the strategic plan. So there have been emails that I've gotten seeking feedback, and I didn't have feedback about the equity work, but I thought, I guess misunderstood the process. I thought that the equity work was going to inform a strategic plan, not that it was in and of itself like a final document that was a strategic plan. And I was looking back to figure out like when the for equity was dropped. So for me, I didn't give the feedback because I thought there was another step. And so I guess what I'm hoping for is to have this step, but definitely not putting words in people's mouth, but to, just have more flesh on the, on the body of work. So, but I guess looking back, like maybe I should have sent emails then, but I know I've definitely spoken up at meetings before about like, what's next? And I guess I didn't realize there wasn't a next until, the August. So I apologize, I don't know how I missed that.
so Will Coleman and Todd. Go ahead. Okay. So in the minutes, can you recap what the charge was?
This is what I have. Motion to create a committee charge, motion to create an ad hoc committee, strategic plan working group, to synthesize the feedback to incorporate between reviews.
Is that captured? So we had a motion and we had a second. So let's vote on the motion on the floor, which is to form this group with the charge that Mary Heather just read. And I won't repeat it. I won't read all the words. So all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Keep your hands up. Yeah. Keep your hands up.
Let me get this.
We're voting to form this subcommittee that will look at what Jason said was.
Right, so why wouldn't we all vote for it, even if we're not in favor of
You
the two?
Right.
Yes.
No, but I mean, I'm getting confused.
I think we just have to vote to make it
Official.
official.
That's part of the
That's why we
process.
voted.
Well, I'm voting.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
And those Opposed? So the motion passes. And what, any abstentions? I think that, okay. So if folks could send me their interest over the next couple days, that would be great.
Barbara, do we have a due date for this?
That's a really cool thing.
Concern is with this charge that you're again looking at a very long conversation.
I think the next board meeting is not. In a month? More days.
The 13th? November 13th?
What is the week, is that the week of the?
Yeah, it is.
Right,
It is.
so familiar.
Yes, it is.
So.
But, so if everything's done before then, so we can focus on the superintendent.
Yeah. The only other option is to schedule a board meeting prior to that week that we've mapped out or blocked out for the superintendent. So then it's either needs to be the 23rd or the 27th of November, which feels very far away, or we select a date for a special meeting. Right? Is that? So if we did a special board meeting, would the 6th of November work? Or the 30th of October?
Is that 6th of November? Yeah.
I just think it's really good.
Okay, the 30th?
What was up for the Tuesday?
Yes.
This is for presentation to Friday.
Right.
At a special meeting, that would be on October 30th.
So let's, say that we'll have, go ahead.
Can I just weigh in that the 6th? The 6th is better, just because we schedule out a month, so I'm already having to split a day off. Nights, so.
So if we made it the 6th, would that work? Okay. So let's do the 6th then. What time?
6 to 7:30 meeting.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, be a 6 to 7:30.
6 to 7:30?
6:30.
6:30. And the only thing on the agenda would be this discussion. So with an hour and a half,
I would rather plan for more and get out early than it goes long.
6:30 to 8. 6:30 to 8:30.
Let's do 2 hours.
okay, 6:30 to 8:30.
Special meeting?
And then once the committee, the ad hoc committee or group is going to form, we'll schedule a meeting.
I'll just ask a housekeeping
Yes.
question. So that presentation on the 6th, that we have that would just be presentation, discussion, not board action.
I think it probably has to just be a presentation. I mean,
It's new information.
because people need time to weigh in on it. Yeah. Whereas the action could take place on the 27th.
So that meeting will have to be warned on November 1st, which means.
Well, we'll go ahead and warn it even before that, now that we know this.
But we'll have to include materials for.
True, you're right. True. So that gives the due date month before it has to be done. So, looking at the agenda just really quick, There was an opportunity for committee updates. At this time, I didn't list all of the various groups, but wanted to provide an opportunity if a specific committee had something that they wanted to report on to the board, that they could do so. And that will run through to every committee. Steve?
For Hanford, I did update, open house is the 9th, November 9th, from 4:30 to 6:30. On negotiations, we did receive a letter of intent to negotiate a successor agreement on September 29th. We have been in contact with the association, but not done yet. The negotiations committee did reach out. A proposal, I don't know how to word this. Additionally, for negotiation meetings, which drag on for very long, there would be at least a board. Field I've approached our internal catering, said $60 to $75 per session, and that if we fed the association as well, that would add another $30 to $60 per session, depending on how many representatives they send.
$100.
Right. So I mean, I don't know. I think it's a small enough expense that we don't have to approve it, but I did want to present it to the board in case
Yes.
someone did want to question it.
Any feedback on that? Feed the people, okay.
Fed negotiators are generally.
It helps. And just the work plan will move, to the next agenda. And I'll send an email out on the superintendent search regarding Wednesday. Is there another, I'm sorry, committee meeting?
Well, we want some happiness real quick along communication and engagement. When I went to the Bridgeport open house, again, asked that anyone who wanted could leave a comment or question, and we got a few of them, which I said I would read out loud at the next meeting. There were several parents who really felt strongly that after-school programs should be established in Bridgeport. So we'll bring that out to the board, but that was a recurring comment that we received while we were there. Beyond that, there's a lovely interaction. Happened to have an older sibling who was attended and felt passionate enough to leave a card saying that the high school's new Aspire program has been really helpful. It offers so much more flexibility and support, and I'm glad I have access to it for my senior year. So that was Jude Smith, who really was excited about that opportunity and wanted the board to know. And then Peyton in kindergarten says that they don't like sitting still for so long. And further discussion highlighted that perhaps different types of seats would be helpful in the classroom. And then, there you go. Yeah. And then preschool Oakley said that he thinks cockroaches should be in every class. And then further discussion led to also tarantulas, stick bugs, praying mantises because they're cool to look at. So that was the feedback that
We're gonna work on that, right?
we got from Bridgeport.
Sure, have snakes and have bugs.
Is there any other? Yes, Joanne.
So the CPAC had its first meeting of the academic year last Thursday on October 5th. The committee will meet monthly on the first Thursday of the month at 5:30 in the high school library. Thought it was a very positive meeting. Jen and Mary shared out some of the committee's current work, which includes website building, which is in its final stages, the creation of a closed Facebook group, the addition of listening sessions that will happen before each monthly meeting, and back to school night presence. They introduced me and Suzanne as the board representatives and reintroduced Tracy Harrington and Laura Nugent as the ACSD administration representatives. An outline of priorities was shared in open conversation and feedback. Looking ahead, the addition to the monthly meetings, the hope is to have 3 community events and a spring annual report to the board.
Great, thank you. Any other?
Finance met today, Steve and I were there, and just went over a summary of the development of the budget. There's no suggestions in different ways, different actions taken, right? to bring the result.
Any other? Next is public comment on any topic. So I'd like to open it up, yes. You're waking up. Can you say your name?
Tyrus P.
Okay.
Is it okay if I hop up front?
Sure.
All right. Is it okay if I put my computer here? Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyrus Peak, and this is my second year as paraprofessional educator at Mary Hogan Elementary School, and I have a undergraduate degree in athletic training, and right now I'm a current grad student working towards earning my master's degree in physical education. Last Friday, I had to leave work early due to the fact I was so overwhelmed with emotions due to being overstretched for my typical duties and consistently seeing unsafe behavior. Mary Hogan has been understaffed, particularly with paraprofessionals. And there has been constant unsafe behavior from a handful of children, specifically 2 kindergarten classes and 1 first grade class. I have seen kids become traumatized from this constant behavior, and I have even seen kids that are typically safe start to show unsafe behavior. I'm tired and overstretched. The tipping point for me was the fact that there was a student who has a history of constant unsafe behavior, physically harming another student in the morning, then was disruptive in class via shouting and repeatedly punching and kicking me while I was standing between that student and the rest of the class. I called for support, and I saw students watching with scared faces for 6 to 8 minutes while I was waiting for help to arrive. There needs to be change. There needs to be more support in order to protect everyone's health and safety. These daily behaviors are traumatizing to kids, and we are encouraging them to turn a blind eye to abusive behavior. This is not okay. Safety is the bare minimum for operating a school. Right now, many kids have told me they do not feel safe and are scared to go to school. I hope the school board can find more adults who can support Mary Hogan Elementary School, perhaps by looking at all ACSD employees and prioritizing the number of adults who are directly working with students and considering paying paraprofessionals a higher hourly wage to create more desire for people to apply for these vacant positions. Thank you for your attention to my letter and concern. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Do I have to go up front?
No.
Okay, I'm a teacher, but I hate being up front. So my name is Julie Altos, and I'm the librarian at Mary Hogan, and I've worked in the building for 23 years now, which makes me old. I came because I wanted to support Ty. Friday was a rough day for him. And being in the library, I have had 3 teachers last week who came into my space and said, I can't do this year. So they're in tears, our students are struggling, and I am working with Jen Kravitz, our principal. I made it a personal goal, one of my professional goals this year, to really focus on safety for all students. And I'm a solutions-based person, so I'm working hard to try to come up with creative solutions to support all of my colleagues and students in the building. I am working with Jen Kravitz, our principal. We have a once a month meeting and we had a really productive meeting last week. She just shared tonight that there are some action steps that are happening. She's working closely with Nicole Carter. So our hope is that we do get the supports we need at Mary Hogan. I think as the board just looks at the action team, number one is kids need to feel safe. And I just think our district needs to look at how we best use what we have to meet the needs of all of our students in all of our schools. And so I know that goes to a really tricky place, but like we have so many people, resources, and how do we make sure that all of our students at all of our schools are feeling safe and our faculty feeling safe coming in each day. So I personally have reached out to every person who's filled out a form saying they'd be willing to volunteer at Mary Hogan. I'm trying to gather more adults. I think more adults leads to more connections for kids, and maybe we can, by plugging in some adults in these kids' lives, that they'll feel connection, even if it's a community member. So I just hope that when we look at the strategic plan, we're looking number one at that safety piece and how do we advocate for all students in our district.
Anyone else? I also, like Ty, wrote a letter but it was in conjunction with many other teachers that we coordinated our ideas into a letter that we got over 30 staff to sign at Mary Hogan. And so it basically, like Ty and Julie, is just focusing on safety. And so we've had a lot of absent teachers for all good reasons, and that has resulted in shifting of roles, so people can't do their contracted jobs. So that it's been really a concern for many, many people. And then we just want you all to be aware of what's happening because we weren't sure how many of the board understood the extent to which Mary Hogan has had struggles that way. And also because Heather Bucci, the interim secretary of education of the state, wants to emphasize educator mental health and wellness as a major area of focus for the AOE. I think we should all be aware of that in our district as well and understand that if we aren't healthy and safe at school as adults, the kids can't be either, and we need more adults to help guide them. Thank you.
Did you put a name?
Sarah Ingersoll,
Oh, sorry.
Mary Hogan, I've been there for many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would like to, but if anybody else has something to say in this, okay, all right. Mary Slozar, Weebridge. I just wanted to follow up on the strategic plan discussion, hopefully with constructive, helpful input in some way. I don't know to what extent any of my input is viewed that way, but I truly intended that way. I just wanted, listening to you all talk and to the administration team, I hear everybody kind of, I hear a lot of consensus, but it's not consensus in where you're going, but I hear consensus around valuing the process that went into creating the current draft, valuing the input from community members. I don't think anybody has ever questioned that. I think everybody also agrees that it is the administration's job to put the meat on how the plan gets implemented. But what I'm hearing from a lot of school board members and from in this meeting and in the past is that it feels like the wrong mix of meat on the bones in this current draft. Like not enough of some stuff and too much of some things, like the prescriptive stuff. So I just wanted to highlight that from where I sit, I hear those themes, and I think that's really important as you think about your next steps in the process. I also wanted to highlight that goal number 3, the additions that the team came and proposed to you. I agree, it's great. I did want to propose a conceptual distinction. For me, that's not a adding to the goal, it's an operationalization of the goal. So you have a concept that you set, that you want success, And that is a way to operationalize that. And I think what I hear is everybody's hungry for that kind of translation for all of our goal areas. And I would just suggest you consider that it's not changing the goals, but thinking about what that means and what we want to achieve for our kids. I also want to come back, someone mentioned the new superintendent search. I have the same concern that we don't have a superintendent right now that would be responsible for implementing this plan. I also worry that we could be hurting our chances of getting the best superintendent we could get by hastily trying to get something in place and then expecting them to hold the bag and implement it moving forward. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think that should be something you're thinking about, how this influences your hiring process. Two more quick points is just Jason raised something about the responsibilities of the board, and I just wanted to share, I am not the knower of all these things, but I wanted to share from my understanding, my reading of the roles and responsibilities in Vermont legislative stuff, poke around, you find these things, is that the goal, the board's role is to set the vision and the goals, and the administration's role is to say how we're going to get there and develop that strategic plan that looks like all these other things people have been looking at. There's no distinction between an implementation plan and a strategic plan. Okay. Okay, finally, I would very much consider how this strategic plan builds into all the things our administration already is working on that are there and real and should be part of what we're observing and monitoring.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question. I just like a copy of the response letter.
Oh, sorry, that is Mary Heather, do you
Mary-
have it? Send it to Mary Heather. And I sent it to you.
I think it was linked in, okay.
I sent
Dr.
it to
Williams'
you.
But I haven't checked my
Update.
Sorry, didn't see it.
No, it's okay.
Right, it's not, none of the signatures are there, but I believe it's
So,
the letter
did
that
you-
Dr. Williams linked in his last week.
Okay, did you get the signed letter?
That's the
You
letter we
guys,
have
You
received.
know.
Point of order, we're not,
Sorry.
we're still in the meeting. So if there's no further public comments, online, is there anyone online that would like to make a public comment? Okay, thank you for reminding me. Then I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. A second? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry for the long.
Thank you.